last night, shutting down immigration to this country. He issued a tweet last night, his previous tweet, that said he intends to issue an executive order suspending immigration to the United States, citing coronavirus and the, quote, need to protect the jobs of our great American citizens. The Washington Post reports the announcement caught some Homeland Security officials off guard, while a senior administration official tells NBC News the plan has been under consideration for some time. Yet the move may be too little too late. As you know, numerous health officials and allies of the president's own administration as far back as January had pushed the president on similar restrictions, specifically the travel ban from Europe. Other officials, including his own deputy national security advisor, joined the chorus in calling for stricter travel measures just days later. Yet, it wasn't until nearly a month and a half later, on March 11th, that the president shut down travel from Europe. Let's bring in senior White House reporter for NBC News Digital, Shannon Pettypiece. Shannon, we'll get to you in just a moment. Joe, my first thought when I read that tweet last night as we were all going to bed was, the virus is here. I know this feels good politically, perhaps, to shut down immigration, and it's a signal to people, but the virus doesn't know about the border, number one, and to cross the border sometime back in January.
Oh, by the way, people, I mean, we don't want people coming here that may be infected. Think about if you're in another country. Somebody told me 3 weeks ago, a diplomat told me that other countries were scared to death of Americans going into their country because we have more cases than anywhere in the world, and our testing is so dismal, people are scared to death of Americans coming into their country. So, you know, again, the thing is, though, this is symbolic. What he did last night is symbolic, just like the China ban was symbolic, because he'd already let 430,000 people came from China to the United States from the beginning of this. An additional 40,000 came to the United States from China, even after his so-called ban. And Willie, as you pointed out, when he put that toothless China ban in, again, toothless because he was afraid the markets may go down, he was begged by his own health officials to shut down travel from Europe at the end of January. But Steve Mnuchin and Donald Trump said no, they weren't going to ban travel from Europe at the end of January because, again, they didn't want to harm the stock market. He finally did it again in March, but by that time, all the travel between Europe and New York especially caused a massive outbreak. And just as you said, people came over here. Nobody thought it was a big problem. Donald Trump said it was not a big problem. And then 2 weeks later, we start having these explosions, these outbreaks in New York City. And that's a real problem. But you're right, though. People are already in here. And that's why when Donald Trump is screaming at reporters saying, look at me, I did this toothless China ban. I did this toothless China ban back before a single person had died. That's like a cop saying, hey, I locked the front door after you let all the killers inside the house. Little late. Little late. So let's go to Shannon. Shannon, a lot of things going on at the White House. The president's tweeting, of course, about his favorite television show. He just can't quit us. We wish he could. But also he's tweeting these decrees from the White House at night. One day he says he's Spartacus. The next day he says he's powerless. And then yesterday he's talking about how 1 or 2 million people could have died if we didn't have social distancing. This is a president who just can't seem to make up his mind.
Well, and yesterday he was talking about opening up the country, and now this move to essentially close it down to immigration. But I will say this tweet caught White House officials off guard. This is something that had been talked about in the White House for quite a while. But the idea of the president tweeting it, I think it was around 10 o'clock last night, surprised a lot of people. And we're not able to get any specifics from anyone yet about what countries would be affected or how this would be implemented. And it also is surprising because it probably won't have a lot of real-world implications, because for the most part, immigration is shut down. We have a non-essential travel ban on Mexico, on China, on most countries in Europe. India, where we get a lot of immigration from, is at a nationwide lockdown, so we're obviously not getting a lot of immigrants from there. And then visa offices are closed in a lot of places. Appointments, interviews to get a visa have been canceled. So there's just not a lot of immigration going on. On the other front, where this is concerning, is for farmers. The administration had been talking about trying to loosen restrictions on migrant workers during the pandemic to get them the documentation they need to come over and work for the harvest season. And a lot of farmers have been complaining that they're not getting the labor, the farm labor that they need through legal immigration. So the administration had been in the process of talking about how to make it easier and lift these restrictions on migrant labor. So how would this affect those? So not a lot of implications, a lot of questions, but I will say there is one way that this does make sense, and that is politically for the president. He wants to get the conversation back onto immigration. This is the topic he always wanted to be talking about for his 2020 reelection. He made sure to bring up the border wall yesterday in the briefing when the head of the Army Corps of Engineers was there to talk about hospitals and building hospitals. The president made a segue into talking about the wall and touting how many miles of the wall had been built. So he always wants to be talking about immigration. It's a number one issue for Republicans. It's a number one issue for a lot of voters in those key swing states. And with all the focus on the pandemic, this is one way he can get the country talking back about immigration, which is where he thinks he has some strength in his reelection efforts.
NBC, Shannon Pettypiece, thank you very much. And one of the sort of slight problems here, Joe, is that during a pandemic like this, with a virus that spreads like this, which, you know, has different types of exposure, different types of symptoms for people, different age groups are affected, you're not afraid of immigrants, you're afraid of everybody. Anybody and everybody at this point, until we have testing. Could be a predatorial virus-holding person that doesn't even know they're doing it.
Well, and by the way, I'll say
it's not immigrants.
I'll say that. Well, it's everybody.
It's nuts what he's saying.
It's everybody. I'll say the same thing about immigrants now as I said about Syria back when Syria was blowing up. Unless you can screen Syrians coming in several years ago in the middle of the Civil War, no, we shouldn't let people go. We shouldn't do what Germany did, letting the Syrians come in where they couldn't. They had no idea whether they could figure out whether they were going to be safety risks or not. I mean, it's the same thing here. No, of course not. We don't want people immigrating here unless we can make sure that they are safe and that it's healthy.
But the enemy is not immigrants, it's testing.
The enemy...
We don't have it.
The enemy is this virus and how this virus spreads. So I'm not going to say we should be making a political point by letting a lot of immigrants in right now to make us feel good about ourselves. No, shut it down. It's just like I said with China. Shut it completely down. Shut the travel down. Take care of what we have. We don't have enough testing for Americans. So it's ridiculous. For Donald Trump to even tweet that. It was symbolic. It surprised his own people in the White House last night. But he has to do it because he thinks somehow that's going to help him. It's not going to help him. Because really, a new poll just came across from the Washington Post. It's a University of Maryland poll. It finds most rate Trump's coronavirus response negatively and expect crowds will be unsafe until summer. 54% rate his performance as poor in this pandemic. A full 72%, though, say that their governors are doing a great job, and only 26% say their governors are doing a poor job. So again, Donald Trump can try his Wizard of Oz routine all he wants. It's just not working because people who are fighting this pandemic see what they see and know what they know. And they're not watching protests on cable news and going, yeah, hey, I want to go out and hang out with a lot of people in tight, confined spaces. They know doctors or nurses. They know loved ones who've been impacted by this pandemic, and they want to keep their family safe.
Of course. And that Washington Post poll reflects what the NBC poll showed, which is that people are happy with the job their governors are doing by and large, and they are concerned, vast majorities, about going back to work too soon. They want to go back to work. They need the jobs, but they don't want to go back if it's just going to reset the clock on this and force us to shut down again. I just quickly, before we go, I want to go back to Shannon's reporting and think about what she said. We've gotten used to this over 3.5 years, but it's worth pausing and thinking that the President of the United States, according to the reporting, surprised his own White House, surprised Homeland Security, surprised, in other words, all the people who would need to know, all the people who theoretically would get together in a room and make this decision by stopping immigration to this country. A decision as monumental as shutting down immigration to the United States, it appears, was made by a president sitting with his phone, probably watching cable news, and hitting send on a tweet without consultation, and then everyone has to run in behind him and rationalize and justify this big decision.
But, you know, it's just like the I am Mussolini or I am Spartacus. He just says it for a fact, right? I mean, yes, it's frightening as hell, and we all need to be on notice about that. But he just does it for a fact, and then there's just never any follow-through. It's always for a fact. He's a day trader. He changes his position. He's changed his position several times this week. And, you know, Jim VandeHei, it's frightening to Americans who, you look at these poll numbers, they're not ready for their states to open up yet. It reminds me of that old Ronald Reagan saying where he said a recession is when your neighbor has lost his job, a depression's when you've lost your job. Well, an epidemic is when your neighbor and his family or her family gets sick. A pandemic is when somebody in your family gets sick or is affected by it. And, man, there are millions and millions and millions of Americans who have family members who have either been impacted by this or have underlying health concerns, and they're scared to death and want to protect their family. And all the political BS, all the talk radio BS, all the cable news BS, all the press conference BS in the world is not going to change that fact.
One of the complexities in covering Donald Trump is he often speaks or tweets in these bright, booming colors, but then governs in gray. And what I mean by that is I don't even know what that tweet meant last night. We have very few immigrants coming into the nation. Most of our borders are blocked down. We've stopped the screening process because you're trying to keep people out. So I don't know if he actually means that we're going to have some kind of prolonged immigration ban, if it'll be any different from now. So the people not knowing about it internally probably have about as good information as we have. And it's confusing, I think, to reporters. It's confusing to the public. One day he's going to say, yes, I have the authority to tell every governor in the nation what to do, despite what the Constitution says. The next day he says, I'm going to defer to them. And where it's frustrating, these mixed messages, because even the people who kind of want to be educated. I was talking to my brother about this yesterday, who is a Trump supporter, and he's like, well, wait a second, it does seem like everything's being overhyped. And I'm like, well, just listen to the president himself. He's the one who has said that 1 million or 2 million people would die if we don't take these precautions. But then the next day he'll tweet something that stands in stark contrast to that. And that's probably why people look at their governors and say, I'm very supportive of the governors, and they look at Donald Trump and they're frustrated because governors just have to deal with the facts on the ground. They have to be very clinical about the decisions they're making. They have to be very science-based, very based on the sort of the facts on the ground. And I think that's one of the casualties of these press conferences. It's 2.5 hours of things that are often hard to find a consistency in so that we can work from a common set of facts.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.